the help of all these disclaimers by Paola, I'll try to show you these two cases involving the unmanned aircraft systems. So here, like in the previous real cases, the idea is to show you the legal gaps or the possible legal liabilities and responsibilities in the management of this kind of new technologies and the introduction of these new technologies in the civil aviation system. Okay. So as you probably know, unmanned aircraft systems are those aircraft intended to operate without with no pilot on board. So we have basically two kinds of unmanned aircraft. The first one is the autonomous aircraft that operate completely in an automated way. And then we have the remotely piloted aircraft systems that are piloted by pilot station on the ground. The regulatory framework for this unmanned aircraft is based on the ICAO regulation. So we have the ICAO convention that states that we cannot have unmanned aircraft autonomously flying in the civil skies. And for the remotely piloted aircraft, we have like a circular on this aspect, which states some condition for the use of these aircraft. So they can fly only in segregated airspace. The remote pilot need a license like the pilot of manned aircraft, and then has the ultimate responsibility for the aircraft, like in the manned aircraft. And this kind of aircraft can be used for commercial, scientific, and security applications. In the first case that I want to show you, we imagine a kind of a use for security reasons. So we imagine that a nuclear reactor of an important nuclear power plant had some problems, and so we had a radiation leak. For this reason, the national authorities decided to evacuate the population from that area and to close the relevant airspace in that area. So, and then they decide to arrange and authorize a mission, a non-military mission, to monitor the emissions of this nuclear reactor. And to this end, they use a unmanned aircraft. So we have two pilot stations necessary to cover all the trajectory of this flight. And then in the pilot station, we have the licensed remote pilot and also a manager, the mission manager who is responsible for the data collection. This aircraft use this blows system that is, the aircraft has an automated system which helps the aircraft itself to separate the aircraft from the terrain and from other possible traffic in the area. Okay. So the case is that another flight who is flying in the civil airspace had a problem, so a problem of depressurization in particular on board. And so this aircraft had to descend and enter the segregated airspace. So the pilot of this manned aircraft informs the air traffic controller of the problem. And then following the emergency procedures, asks the air traffic controller to land in the nearest airport. So the air traffic controller coordinates this aircraft landing and informs both pilots, so the remote pilot and also the the pilot of this aircraft that he will take the responsibility for the separation between these two aircraft. Later, the air traffic controllers notices that the orbital trajectory of the unmanned aircraft is likely to collide with the trajectory of the other aircraft, and so he has to define a safe strategy to avoid the collision. And he provides the unmanned aircraft with an instruction to reduce his speed. Then, so the remote pilot in the pilot station helps to decide, because the onboard detect and avoid system detects the potential conflict with the instruction of the air traffic controller, and suggests not to reduce speed but to descend. So we have a kind of discussion between the pilot, the remote pilot, and the mission manager, and in the end they decide to apply the air traffic controller instruction, because in this way they thought that they could save the goal of the mission, that was to collect this information about the nuclear accident. And so they decide to reduce the speed, but this was the wrong choice, because we have this collision in the midair. So here the problem is related to a kind of the analysis of the accident is related to latent condition, because the air traffic controller didn't have an accurate information about the time of the reaction of the unmanned aircraft and its trajectory. And then we have a series of active errors related to the air traffic controller ineffective avoidance instruction, then the remote pilot that didn't perceive that the instruction suggested by the aircraft controller was effective. And then the mission manager who interfered, let's say, with the decision about safety. Okay, so if we look at the possible liabilities that we can attribute in this case, and we start from the remote pilot station, we can see that we have this ineffective decision of the remote pilot due to this necessity to balance the safety of the flight with the successfulness of the mission, the security mission. So the remote pilot has the ultimate responsibility for the safety of the operations, and here we can think that he has a kind of liability for negligence, at least, because he tried to balance two different goals. As if we look at the mission manager, here we have to understand if he has any competence on safety of the flight. So if he has the competence to interfere with the trajectory and suggest trajectory for the flight or not. Because in case he has this competence, we can consider him to contribute to the accident. In the other case, we can use this interference to understand why the remote pilot chooses to follow the wrong trajectory, the wrong instruction. If we look at the air traffic controller, here we can have another case of negligence, maybe because failed, maybe we can consider that he failed to respect the necessary due care standard. So the speed reduction instruction was not good for to maintain safety and to maintain the necessary separation between the two flights. And so maybe it could be charged with this liability for faulty supervision. If we go on to the air company of the manned flight, here we can have the classical kind of liability. So the strict liability with cap and with the right of recourse, and then if we look at the air navigation service provider, the same as in the real case, we can have this kind of liability. If we move on and we consider, I want to start from the state, because here one of the questions that we address is if the state was responsible in any way because it decided to segregate a specific airspace without caring of the possible interference between this decision and the civil traffic, the civil air traffic. But here, in our opinion, the problem is that the national authorities decide to close the airspace in order to limit health risks related to this specific problem to their nuclear power plant. And so it tried to segregate the airspace necessary only on a proportional, on the basis of the proportionality principle. So this means that they segregated the area necessary to limit the health risk for the population, and then on this basis it decided to authorize the mission. Okay. This was the first scenario. Yeah.
Sorry, again. Now you could ask, how do you intend to use this kind of scenario? What do you want to claim with this kind of situation? We don't want to claim that this situation is going to happen, for sure. What we want to show is this kind of analysis and say, look, if a day, unfortunately, this concept will be applied in this way, and this kind of situation will happen, there is the risk that the liability attribution will follow this scheme. Is this scheme acceptable for all the stakeholders involved? This is the purpose of this scenario, to discuss with you if you think that, first of all, if the concept is applied in this way, but also if applying the concept in this way, it raises issues in terms of concept acceptability related to liability attribution that are better to know now than when the technology is fully ready and applied. This is the exercise that we invite you to do with us.
Okay, so the second case maybe is quite more realistic, because as Fabio Ruta remembered before, here we imagine the case of a remoted, of a kind of incident that happened due to a problem into the communication link between the unmanned aircraft and the pilot station. So we have this remote piloted aircraft that is integrated in the civil airspace and is used for commercial purpose. We have, as I said, these two pilot stations that control the trajectory of the aircraft. And so, okay, you can go on. Okay, so what we have is that is a failure in the communication link, as I said, between the aircraft and the pilot station. In this case, we have, because the remote pilot, we imagine that is able to download the aircraft parameters, but is not able to instruct the flight and manage it. So it tries to use the other pilot station as a backup, but the flight is too far from it, and so there is no connection between the pilot station and the unmanned aircraft. So the unmanned aircraft is able to automatically follow the flight plan and manage landing, but the remote pilot informed the air traffic controller of these problems, and the air traffic controller separates the unmanned aircraft from the rest of the traffic, creating a kind of... Sorry?
Separates the other traffic from the...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so he create a kind of buffer around the unmanned aircraft, and so the unmanned aircraft is able to land perfectly. But the problem is after the landing, because it maintains a too high speed, goes out of the runway and stops against an airport building. So we have damages to the unmanned aircraft and to the building. In this case, yeah, we have so the technical failure in the communication link, and then we have this active behavior of both the remote pilot and also the air traffic controller. And the problem is due to another kind of technical malfunctioning of the unmanned aircraft after the landing. If we look at, so we have a kind of de facto transformation of the unmanned aircraft from being remotely piloted to being an automatic system at all. And looking from liability issues, here we can say that the remote pilot and also, as well as the air traffic controllers performed their tasks correctly, because they use all the necessary precaution to manage the possible incident. Okay. The problem is that, of course, the air company of the unmanned flight could be considered strictly liable with the in the usual framework. So the problem is that the entity who is in the control of the unmanned aircraft is responsible for it. Then the other problem is related to technology, so the malfunctioning of technology. And here we can discuss if the communication technology provider could be considered liable for strict liability if we consider the communication provision like a product, or liable for fault. So for negligence, if we consider the service, this communication like a service. And also we have the contractual liability in this case. A particular role could also be played by the maintenance providers, because we can ask ourselves why the unmanned aircraft couldn't stop and couldn't reduce its speed. And so in this case, we have to see if who is responsible for this bad maintenance. So if it's the owner of the aircraft or the user, or who effectively performed the maintenance tasks. So, and that's a problem. In moreover, we can also consider if we need an insurance for this kind of aircraft if we want to make them fly in the civil airspace. So also in this case we can apply a kind of first-party insurance and also a third-party insurance. And that's it.